We're going to take a look at the common logo design mistakes that people make and different types of logo marks. Okay, so one of the most common mistakes in logo design is the logo design is too common. This is something that we would also be considered cliche. So things that typical things that you see within logos that may have worked at first, but are overdone is a great example of this. So you can see a lot of the swooshes, anything that you see in a trend that is overly designed in regards to seeing multiples of it. You can see here on the slide, there are several different brands, but some of them look almost similar because they're using similar elements. So try to avoid this. One of the great ways to do this is just doing research at the start of your concepts. Your concept development research, go ahead and look at what's out there, what the trends are in logo design, and then really hone in on the actual brand itself. Who are the competitors? What seems to be the trend in all of the competitor logo marks? How do you want to align your brand so it's not similar, it stands apart, yet is still appropriate for the brand? Another one is too trendy. You know, it's good to have something that looks, as far as a logo is concerned, fresh and new and different, but you don't want it to be too trendy, because then obviously if it's too trendy, probably in the next year or two, it will not be considered fresh and new. It'll be out of date. So a lot of the examples that you see here are typical trendy logo design elements that have been kind of, when you look at it, if it's used today for a revised version of a logo or an update of a logo, this would be considered outdated in regards to their logo elements. Too complex. You know, I think as a designer, you kind of learn the beautiful skill of editing down your designs, especially in logo design. This is something that, you know, can be a process, but you'll eventually get there. Logo design, you want it to be simple, because if it's too complicated, if you don't get it within seconds, it's almost like a billboard design. It's just not going to be effective. These are three great examples of overly complex logos that you really need to focus on and read into and really look at for more than 1 or 2 seconds. So that is definitely not a successful quality for these logos going forward. There's just too much going on, too many elements, a lot of elements that are not needed. So editing these down to be a more simple logo, but you kind of have to balance that line of not being too simple where it's boring. You have to have some interesting elements in there too, to make sure it's not too boring, because you can run the risk of being too plain. So here's some examples of logo marks that are just too plain. They're not memorable at all. If you saw these, obviously this is the new, if you researched and saw the new Gap logo that was revised, kind of went towards the plain part of that sector. They actually, I think, went back to the original logo since then because of so much negative feedback. But these are, great examples of when logos become too simple and too plain, where there's nothing really visually interesting about them to be memorable. Too much pixelation. So this is something that also you learn as a designer. You really want to make sure that you're designing in a vector-based program such as Illustrator. That way this is not, an issue. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you will never be working with raster logos, because obviously you're going to be placing these in different applications. So eventually it will be rastered. So making sure that you have the highest resolution, if that's the case, for your logo, so that it's not becoming pixelated. So when you go from raster to vector, you can see the differences. So a raster image is comprised of pixels. It's pixel dependent. That a raster program, for example, is Photoshop. A vector image is comprised of mathematical equations. It will never be pixelated. It will never be blurry because it is always going to be sharp no matter what size, because it's not dependent upon pixels for, for its image to be seen. It's more of a vector based file that is mathematically programmed. So that's why we use vector-based programs such as Illustrator to design logos. Poor typography is another common mistake in logo design. You can see here there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 examples of different logos on this slide that show poor typography, not appropriate for the actual brand. So you can see here, Bad Hairs, it's I believe a hair studio. It's very hard to read. It's just, would you really go get your hair done at this place? Price Waterhouse, the letters are so different sizes and it's just clumped together. There's no spacing in there. It's very hard to read. Not quite sure if this is an appropriate style for this brand. Then the Harley Davidson Riding Club, which I find kind of funny and interesting how they have this cutesy, elegant, girly type font, definitely opposite of what this brand is all about. Smith & Smith Funeral Directors, again, you got this cutesy, fun, almost like kid-like typeface on the top. Really is the opposite of what this type of business is. Ralph and Joe's, I don't know about you, but I probably wouldn't go to this masonry place for tile correction or tile installation. It almost seems like it might be a little opposite of what I would want. So, thinking about this, you really want to make sure the typeface is appropriate for the brand itself and is visually communicating exactly what that brand is about. Not scalable. This is a big deal. And this is why I always say, test out your logo, print it out, make it smaller to a postage stamp size, so that if it's going to work or not, or if it needs adjustments for readability's sake. Another common mistake is too many colors and effects. You have these filters and like gradients and the colors aren't really going together because they have too many colors. It makes it just overwhelming and harder to see. You can see at the bottom there, too many effects going on as well. Just makes it not very efficient and effective as a logo design, not very versatile either. And then amateurish, if you see these type of logos out there, you probably will say, this is probably done by an amateur, because there's a lot of things going on here that are design mistakes 101. You have, for instance, the clip art in Kate's Florist as far as the guitar too. Clip art in logo design is a no-no because clip art's so accessible to anybody, it becomes, cliche right at the start. You have type over an image, very hard to read. No overall hierarchy, the colors, too many colors. You have a stroke on top of your type, which makes it hard to read, and just overall shapes not quite working for these examples either. So those are some examples of common mistakes that you want to avoid whenever you're creating your logos. Okay, whenever you're ready to print, vector files are the way that you want to go to when you create your files in Illustrator. And the different file types in a vector-based program, the extensions when you save them are, if you're working in Illustrator, are .ai for your working file. That's the Illustrator file. You can also save that out as a PDF, an EPS, or SVG. Things to think about: Pantone colors, are single pre-mixed inks that are not included into plates like CMYK. These are, colors that are picked out of a Pantone color book and typically known as the Pantone matching system. And these colors will never change once printed. As many, copies as you want on the press. The color stays consistent. That's the pro of having a Pantone color. It can get a little pricey though, because it is a Pantone color. It's a pre-mixed ink. You pay a little bit more for that. But as far as logos are concerned, if you want a consistent logo color, a lot of companies will want to definitely have Pantone colors in certain instances to keep that color consistent. You can also have single color black and white for your logo as well. You know, something to think about. Having a single ink is also a little cheaper, but you know, obviously it could make your design look a little bit more flat. But if that's kind of what you're going for in terms of maybe contrast, like for example here, that's something that you can definitely utilize. There are so raster files, and we talked about vector files, that now we're talking about raster files. They're made up of pixels, so you really want to make sure that these, if you're exporting it out as a raster file, that you have you know, enough dots per inch so that it's not going to be blurry whenever you go ahead and, you know, apply that to your application. Okay, types of logo marks. So we just talked about the common logo design mistakes, and then just looked at a couple things within getting your logo ready to print. So let's discuss the different types of logo marks. Though they're all a combination of typography and images, each type of logo gives your brand a different feel. And since your logo is the first thing new customers will see, you want to make sure you get it right. Want to choose the best logo for your business? Then here are some logos you'll need to kind of take a look at and maybe, you know, learn more about. So there's monogram logos or letter marks. So monogram logos or letter marks are logos that consist of letters, usually brand initials. So you have, you know, IBM, CNN, HP, HBO. You're pretty much noticing a pattern. So they're the initials of a few famous businesses with rather lengthy names. So with 2 or 3 words to remember, they've each turned to using their initials for brand identification purposes. So it makes perfect sense for them to use monograms, sometimes called letter marks, logos, to represent their organizations. A letter mark is a typography-based logo that is comprised of a few letters, usually a company's initials. The letter mark is all about simplicity. By utilizing just a few letters, letter mark logos are effective at streamlining any company brand if they have a long name. For example, how much easier is it to say and remember NASA versus the National Aeronautics and Space Administration? Because the focus is on initials, the font you choose or create is very important to make sure your logo is not only on theme with that, what your company does, but also legible when you print on business cards. Also, if you're not an established business already, you may want to add your full business name below the logo so people can begin to learn who you are right away. Then you have word marks or logo types. Similar to a letter mark, a word mark or logo type is a font-based logo that focuses on a business's name alone. So think Visa, Coca-Cola, and even Google. So word mark logos really work really well when a company has a succinct and distinct name. So Google's logo is a great example of this. The name itself is catchy and memorable, so when combined with strong typography, the logo helps create strong brand recognition. Also, like a letter mark logo, typography will be an important decision. Since the focus will be on your name, you'll want to pick a font or create a font that captures the essence of what your business does. For example, fashion labels tend to use clean, elegant fonts that feel high-end, while legal or government agencies almost always stick to traditional, heavier text that feels secure. Consider a letter mark if your business happens to have a long name. Condensing the business name into initials and help simplify your design, and likewise, customers will have an easier time recalling your business and your logo. A word mark is a good decision if you're a new business and need to get your name out there. Just make sure that the name is short enough to take advantage of the design. Anything too long can look too cluttered. A word mark logo is a good idea if you have a distinct business name that will stick in customers' minds. Having your name is in a great design font will make your brand all the stickier. Both lettermark and wordmark logos are easy to replicate across marketing material and branding, thus making them highly adaptable options for a new developing business. Remember that you'll always want to be sculptureless when creating a letterhead or a wordmark. Your business name in a font alone likely won't be distinct enough to capture the nuance of your brand. So make sure you definitely keep an eye out for the details when you're doing this, this technique for a word mark. Pictorial marks or logo symbols. So a pictorial mark, sometimes called brand mark or logo symbol, is an icon or graphic-based logo. It's probably the image that comes to mind when you think logo, the iconic Apple logo, or the Twitter logo, or the Target bullseye. Each of these company logos is so emblematic and each brand is so established that the mark alone is instantly recognizable. A true brand mark is only an image. Because of this, it can be a tricky logo type for new companies or those without strong brand recognition to use. The biggest thing to consider when deciding to go with a pictorial mark is what image to choose. This is something that will stick with your company through its entire existence. You need to think about the broader implications of the image you choose. Do you want to play on your name like John Deere does with their Deere logo? Or are you looking to create deeper meaning? Think about how Snapchat tells us what the product does. Or do you want to evoke an emotion, as the Worldwide Life Foundation does with their stylized image of a panda, an adorable and endangered species? Think about those things. A combination mark logo is a logo comprised of a combined word mark or letter mark and a pictorial mark, abstract mark, or mascot. The picture and text can be laid out side by side, stacked on top of each other, or integrated together to create an image. Some well-known combination mark logos include Doritos, Burger King, and Lacoste. Because a name is associated with the image, a combination mark is a versatile choice, with both the text and icon or a mascot working together to reinforce your brand. With a combination mark, people will also begin to associate your name with the pictorial mark or mascot right away. In the future, you may be able to rely exclusively on a logo symbol and not have to always include your name. Also, because the combination of a symbol and text create a distinct image together, those logos are usually easier to trademark than a pictorial mark alone. So those are the different types of logos, for the most part, typically used logos. There are other ones out there as well, but those are the big hitters that you should focus on and know a little bit more about. And each of these have pros and cons about them too. So whenever you decide to create your logo for whomever you are recreating for or designing a new logo for a client, you want to make sure that you think about those pros and cons and which logo mark would make sense for that particular client.